We need to go beyond resilience. How do we become better because of challenges and chaos?
You're about to hear a wonderful story of a young man named Scott Stirrett. As this podcast comes out, so is his first book, The Uncertainty Advantage.
We need to embrace the uncertainty, embrace the chaos if we're going to survive and to thrive in it.
Scott had a tough childhood. Grew up in a town obsessed with hockey, and he didn't even want to learn how to skate. He was bullied, branded, considered a misfit, but he found his way through that.
I also think one of the main ways you develop self-esteem or self-efficacy is through little wins.
And he shares his story of coming out, not only with his sexuality, but coming out with his personality.
I think that coming out of the closet helps give me the courage.
Leads this extraordinary job at Goldman Sachs to start a business that has touched the lives of tens of thousands of Canadians.
I had a proximity to the problem. I saw that it was hard for a lot of young people in Canada to gain entrepreneurial experience.
But why I think you should listen to this show is how he comes to deal with the uncertainty of life. And we're all dealing with the uncertainty of life. And his thoughts on how that, in fact, can become your advantage.
You can build up this huge problem in your head, but it's not really a problem. It's actually an opportunity.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast. And ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated. Has he lived his mission? Well, so far he's guided over 10,000 young people to thrive in an uncertain economy, navigating unpredictability. And you're going to hear a lot of his story, but Scott, why don't we let you tell it? Welcome to Chatter That Matters.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So Scott, we were talking before the interview started, and I said that really there's so much to your story and so many notes to play, but it really comes down to two words: coming out. Coming out in terms of coming to terms with your sexuality, coming out in terms of you realizing you're not an underdog and that you have a powerful slingshot, and now coming out in behalf of young people and business. Is that fair that we can use that as the two words, as the connective tissue for this?
Totally. I came out twice. I came out, in terms of being gay and my sexuality, and I came out almost at the same time as like an entrepreneur and launching Venture for Canada. I don't think it's a coincidence that I made these kind of two big life decisions right around the same time.
I want to go to Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and you describe yourself as a misfit in a hockey-obsessed town.
Dartmouth and Cole Harbour is a place that hockey is like a religion. It's a place where Nathan McKinnon's from. It's a place where Sidney Crosby is from. And it's not a coincidence that hockey is like a huge part of the identity of the place. And I actually don't even really know how to skate at all. I hated skating. I took a bunch of skating lessons. And as I grew up, I really felt like I didn't fit into the mold. As I got older into elementary school, I experienced a ton of bullying from other kids, being like ostracized, of really feeling incredibly isolated. And I think that was a symptom of me at a fundamental level not feeling like I fit in. And that really related a lot to my sexuality. And
you even use this meme of smear the queer. And I felt for you when you talked about it, but you also framed it as a way for you to also shape your identity.
Yeah, that was something that happened in middle school. At the time, it was very unsettling. And to the credit, the school administration actually took it super seriously and they shut down the game like really quickly. But it was situations like that compounded by 100 or 1,000 little incidents of the thousands of times people using gay in a derogative sense, which was ubiquitous in like the 2000s or early 2000s and the 90s, that really made me not feel comfortable about being open about my sexuality until I was much older in life.
Was there any bedrocks in your life? How did your parents deal with you knowing that? I would imagine you were going through so much pain, like walking out the door to school was like walking into a nightmare versus other people maybe skipping down the street.
My parents have always been like incredibly supportive, both my mom and my dad in different ways. My mom played a huge role in fostering, I think, a sense of possibility. For years, like 4 or 5 years, like every single night before I went to bed, my mom would ask me a question, what's the most important thing in the world? And I would respond to believe in yourself. And in a time that was very socially isolating, where I was being bullied a ton, it was that kind of encouragement that I did think helped foster a really strong sense of self-belief. And then in my dad, I think he fostered my entrepreneurial spirit and my intellectual curiosity, bringing home the Economist magazine when I was like 10, which I still read religiously to this day, and being a huge person encouraging me to write this book. I feel so much for folks who go through these challenges who don't have supportive parents, because I had a lot of bedrock support in my life.
And you also talked about struggling academically. So it's not only are you dealing with the emotional crisis, you also felt that maybe you were a square peg in a round hole when it came to school.
There were definitely periods of time that I started to more excel academically. But in kind of grade 6, 7, 8, I really felt like I was behind a lot of students. I remember my grade 6 French teacher basically told me to like give up on French because I didn't have the knack on it. Today, I'm not fully bilingual, but I can do business in French, and I still study with a French teacher every week to continue to improve it. But in grade 7, I transitioned to a more competitive school, and it took me years to catch up. And that first year was brutal. I was actually almost kicked out of the school for not behaving well. And I think partially it was because I felt so frustrated because I was so behind in school. And I remember after this teacher called home and was like, Scott can either improve his behavior or he's out of the school, that it was like a turning point for me of, okay, I'm going to like improve my performance. And, by the time I was in grade 9 or grade 10, this incident was in grade 7, I was not the top of my class, but I was performing at a much higher level.
How important has been that emotional currency to you, where you realize there's more to you than meets the eye, that when that switch goes on, you suddenly go from self-doubt to self-esteem, and from mom just making you repeat to believe in yourself to actually believing in yourself. Do you think that was always there, but somehow or other there was something that unlocked that superpower?
I think I perhaps have a little bit of an innate like self-belief in myself, but I definitely think also that different experiences helped give me more confidence, including my mom. But I also think one of the main ways you develop self-esteem or self-efficacy is through little wins. Just starting to participate in competitive debate in grade 7 and 8 was something that really helped me gain my confidence. And it was a great way to funnel my kind of rebellious teenage energy into something that was productive. And as I won tournaments and I did better and better, I think that was participating in competitive debate was a really important part of my healing journey and of me feeling more confident in myself.
And the last question I have before we're going to move on, but friends, because sometimes when somebody's ostracized, it's almost kryptonite. I don't want to hang around with the person because I'm going to be cast in that shadow. Or did you have friends through this process that said, I don't care, I happen to like you as an individual?
In kind of late elementary school, like kind of grade 4, 5, 6, I definitely did not feel like I had very many friends that were in my circle. There were a few that I would say were kind of loosely supportive, but I really did feel an innate sense of, or not innate, but a really strong sense of isolation. And when you feel ostracized, even as a child, the shame that brings and the emotional kind of toll, like those years were, while I had challenges later on in life, those were in many ways the darkest time. And I have so much empathy and compassion for kids going through tough times and being bullied and being socially isolated, because it is a horrible experience.
And did you need therapy to get through that? Or did you just find a way that as you started gaining some more confidence, that you almost could heal yourself?
I didn't work with a therapist at that time. I ended up working with a therapist more in my late 20s for like the first time. And I just kind of pushed through. And I think to some extent, I didn't realize the sort of psychic toll of some of those experiences until later in my life. I just kept on pushing, and I developed some bad habits that I think have their origins from this time.
You go off to Georgetown, and you describe Georgetown as a jarring transition from predictable small town to a sea of overachievers, combined with a near fatal infection and months of negotiating with U.S. health insurance. I've kind of combined a big part of your story, but let's unpack it this way. Talk to me a little bit about Georgetown, how you're starting to fit in, and then that sledgehammer hits you in terms of a massive health crisis.
And to kind of even rewind a little bit more, my high school experience, kind of grade 10 to 12, was actually really great. Like I felt like I found my people, partly through debate team, partly through really good friends like Niall, who I'm still friends with today, and others. And it wasn't a perfect experience, but I think kind of my 13 to 18-year-old was actually not that bad. But then in going to Georgetown, I felt like I continued to meet a lot of people who were like-minded, who loved politics and international relations. And getting really sick the first semester, it definitely derailed my freshman kind of experience. And rather than focus on getting to know people, I was focused on just like surviving.
When you went through this, I mean, part of it was just trying to navigate the U.S. health insurance. Part of it was surviving. Did you ever think, like, why me? Like, how is it possible that every time I start seeing some silver lining in the cloud, I've had a couple of great years in high school, starting to get my swagger and meeting some like-minded people that, like, what did I do in a previous life that this hits? Or
yeah, I did. In university, I felt a little bit like I got cursed with weird health issues because, for context of listeners, I had pretty serious complications from a wisdom tooth surgery, generally pretty routine. It involved me basically having major surgery on my face to remove a fragment of bone, and me going to the emergency like half a dozen times and all these things. And then one thing I don't talk about in the book, Tony, but later on I actually ended up also having to have surgery for a totally different pilonidal cyst issue, which was also really random and not that many people get. Luckily, knock on wood, since then my health has been quite good, but there was a degree of feeling like I had been hit by bad luck in this time. And I started to develop certain compulsive things like Googling too much about health issues and being really afraid of getting ill, kind of an extreme hypochondriac, and which eventually kind of turned into pretty severe obsessive compulsive disorder.
how did you deal with OCD and this desire to fit in?
Essentially, for listeners, obsessive compulsive disorder, there's two kind of main aspects of it. One is that you do compulsive behaviors with an illusion that you control like the future. So that could be like, I'm going to, wash my hands every single time that I open a door, right? Things that are like excessive, or you just avoid things that you're afraid of. It could be like, for instance, you're afraid of driving. So you just like refuse to drive like a car. If you touch your foot on a crack in the road, then you think that there's going to be a nuclear war. So eventually, kind of when you have OCD and the symptoms get worse and you're doing more of these compulsive behaviors, you're doing more of this avoidance, your life becomes like a lot kind of smaller. In my early 20s, it really wasn't having a huge impact on me at that point, Tony. Like it was beginning to like seep in. It wasn't until COVID, when I was inside for a lot of time, that it really got out of control.
And then you talk about the tombs at Georgetown, a few shots of vodka, and this whole sense of, again, wanting to fit in and the fear of losing friends. That was the start of something as well.
Yeah, my coming out journey was definitely a somewhat unique one. A lot of people come out very intentionally. They tell people, they plan it. I came out by being in a bar. The Tombs is this kind of iconic bar in Washington, D.C. Highly recommend anyone check it out if they're in Georgetown. And I was with an acquaintance who is also gay, who was out at the time. And I ended up doing these 3 shots and just told him. And I didn't really even know this person that well. And it was a very sort of surprise thing to me. And then so the next day I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, I have to deal with all of these things. And while that couple weeks and months that followed were really challenging, they were also, I think, really important for paving the way for like a better life for me.
I have to believe your parents weren't surprised. I mean, people that know you well, or how was the reaction to that?
I think ultimately what was one of my biggest reflections from that is just the importance of being aware of catastrophic thinking, because I thought that coming out would like destroy my life, and it didn't. And I've had an amazing kind of life since then. And it's an example to me of you can build up this huge problem in your head, but it's not really a problem. It's actually an opportunity.
When we come back, Scott and I talk about why he fired himself from Venture for Canada. In fact, they're just looking for a new CEO. He'll still be very involved. And what he plans to do next. And I think he has a gift that can be opened by many.
Before we get back to this amazing story, I want to take a moment to talk to you about RBC. What I want to share with you is a new campaign they've created called You Deserve, starring Will Arnett. And why this ad struck such an emotional chord with me is, yes, we live in this very convenient world, and our phone's this vending machine, and the world's within arm's reach of desire. But there are times when we need to sit face to face with somebody that cares. There's times when we need advice, we need help, we need a place to share an idea and to make our dreams come true. And this is what this ad says to me, that the DNA of RBC is people. People that are there to help you get to where you need, want, and deserve to go.
What makes a bank more than a bank? It's more than products, apps, ATMs. It's being there when you need them, with real people and real conversations. Let's face it, life gets real. RBC is the bank that we Canadians turn to for advice. Because at the end of the day, that's what you deserve. A track record, not some trend. Your idea of banking that's personal happens here. RBC, ideas happen here.
We live in a time that is defined by radical uncertainty, political instability in the world, or AI. And we don't choose what era that we are born into, but we can choose what is our relationship with uncertainty. Learning to embrace uncertainty, to not just tolerate it, but to actually benefit from it, is a superpower for someone in their life and career.
Joining me today is Scott Stirrett. He's an amazing young man who offers such incredible insights on how to embrace the uncertainty of today and turn it to your advantage. Coming out was also the time where this entrepreneurship that your dad had seeded in you with the Economist magazines and your mom with believing in yourself. So how did those two come together at the same time? That's taking on a lot. You're going from fear to fearless.
Yeah, it was definitely a very intense period of my life. After graduating from Georgetown, I went to work at Goldman Sachs in New York City, at the global headquarters right by the World Trade Center. At the time, the World Trade Center was the sort of new buildings were all under construction. This was 2013, 2014. And a lot of people thought this was like the perfect job, and it's well paid. You're working in Manhattan. You're 22 years old. You're in this amazing office. You're working with smart people. But for me, it was not a fit for a variety of reasons. It didn't align with my skills, my interests, my entrepreneurial kind of drive. I decided to leave Goldman Sachs to go launch Venture for Canada because I'm passionate about Canada. I'm passionate about entrepreneurship. And I thought it was a much better alignment of my skills and interests. And I think that coming out of the closet helped give me the courage to also leave Goldman Sachs and plunge into entrepreneurship.
I have to believe you had a lot of pushback from people going, you're doing what? This is Manhattan. This is Goldman Sachs. You're, especially a small town. I mean, you suddenly went from being maybe the debate champion to sort of a poster child that you can leave a small town and conquer the world.
A lot of people thought that I was off my rocker to make that move. But also kudos to my parents. And this is where they're so supportive. They said, go do it. And I don't think I would have necessarily done it if they weren't so encouraging. And it's one of the reasons I founded Venture for Canada is that I think one of the reasons I have taken big risks is I've had that bedrock of support and parents who cheer me on and encourage me to take risks. Most people don't have that.
So I spent a lot of time with entrepreneurs, and there's many that dream, but we all know how difficult the doing is. Talk to me about Venture for Canada and how you found a way to have such unprecedented success, and especially from an individual that really I would say, if you looked at your resume, wasn't laced with a lot of great successful entrepreneurial ventures.
Venture for Canada has been my main kind of entrepreneurial venture in life. As I reflect on it, I think what helped Venture for Canada to be successful were a few things. I think one is that I'm really glad I worked at Goldman Sachs for 1 year, because when I was then around 23, first starting Venture for Canada, to say I worked at Goldman Sachs and to have a little bit of that social proof was really helpful at getting people to believe a little bit in this idea. I was recently, earlier this summer, catching up with someone from the Smith School of Business. They'd been partnering with VFC for 11 years on one initiative. And I joked, I said to this person, I can't believe that she actually believed in me at that point, because I'm 34. I now know how young it is to be 23. And I see 23-year-olds now and I'm like, I had a lot of gumption that I could go out and do it. So, but I'd say other things that were important was that there was a strong founder idea fit. What do I mean by that is that I had proximity to the problem. I saw that it was hard for a lot of young people in Canada to gain entrepreneurial experience. And I understood the problem that I was trying to solve in a way that I think was pretty comprehensive. And I was also willing to work really hard and just be tenacious and to not give up.
It takes me the early days of Venture for Canada and what it is today, not to paint it in terms of bragging, but just how much you've animated this and made it possible and touched so many people.
Yeah, Venture for Canada evolved from just an idea where it was me working on a laptop in an apartment with no furniture in downtown Toronto to over the last 11 years, we've raised over $80 million in funding to support our work from RBC, TD Bank, Scotia Bank, Government of Canada, Peter Gilligan, the Sobeys family, Suncor Energy, and supported thousands and 10,000 plus people. The scale of what Venture for Canada ended up accomplishing through so many people's contributions is way more than I ever thought Venture for Canada would accomplish when I first started out.
You've crystallized some of that with your book. A lot of it is great lessons learned. So the highlight reel, if somebody was sitting down with you and they met you in an airport lounge and said to you, Scott, what are the things that every entrepreneur should put in their knapsack?
Self-compassion. A lot can go wrong when you're building something. And it's important to speak to yourself in a gentle way and to not be perfectionistic and to recognize that your pain and suffering is shared by other people around the world. To be mindful when you're being hard on yourself. And I think self-compassion is something that is key and something I wish I did when I was younger. Another piece of advice I would have for entrepreneurs, invest in network building on a regular basis. So a lot of people are sometimes afraid to connect with strangers. Set goals for yourself of, once a week, I'm going to contact someone new and go to coffee with them or have a call. And think about ways that you can invest in fostering a wide network, so a large number of contacts, and ways you can also foster deep relationships. So that's showing up for friends when they have a child or if their parent's sick, and both are important. Your wide network helps you get jobs and opportunities. Your deep network helps you socio-emotionally when you're going through challenging moments. And lastly, on the network building part is think about ways that you can give back and help other people. Networking that is very self-serving ends up not being very effective. But when you focus on how can you help somebody, for instance, I was just meeting with someone on the weekend who was thinking about a career transition, and I was like, okay, here's 5 people who I think would be great for you to connect with. And I reached out to all of them. And who knows, maybe one of those intros can be really helpful to this person and also then helpful to other people.
And you called it the uncertainty advantage. And one of the other ones that I thought was a sense of master key generalist skills. It wasn't about, I'm an incredible coder and therefore I'm going to build a business around it. But you're saying that being able to play a variety of different positions is of immense value. Is that fair, what you're trying to get across with that?
Totally. It's one of the core pillars of the book, I believe, pillar 4. And I think in an era that is more and more going to be influenced by AI, who knows if artificial general intelligence is already here or if super intelligence is just around the corner. Ultimately, our ability to relate with other people, to focus, be creative. These kinds of generalist skills are going to be more and more important in a world where the technical skills are likely to be more automated.
And one of the ones that you talk about this is antifragility, which I thought was you expressing what happened to you in COVID. When there's disorder, uncertainty, chaos, confusion, complexity, yet you can actually grow stronger from it.
The only way out is through. We don't choose the world that we live in today. We live in, as Stephen Pelosi, the former governor of the Bank of Canada, says, an age of uncertainty. We need to embrace the uncertainty, embrace the chaos if we're going to survive and to thrive in it. Too many people think of difficulty and they think, I just need to push through. I need to be resilient. And we need to go beyond resilience. We need to think about how do we become better because of challenges and chaos. And that's at the core of what anti-fragility is. An anti-fragile person is someone who gains from disorder and doesn't just tolerate disorder.
Isn't that really your biography?
There's aspects of my biography that totally relate to anti-fragility. And I think it's one of the reasons why I like it as a piece of advice is what my experiences in COVID with OCD or Georgetown and getting really sick or coming out. All of these things, I think, helped me eventually to become a more resilient, ideally a more compassionate person. I think sometimes we think about this idea that what doesn't kill us makes us weaker. I am definitely a believer that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, makes us more creative, makes us more compassionate. And that's definitely my lived experience.
If you could do it all again, would you take on all the trauma you took on to be in that confident position you are today, or would you have preferred a skip through the park?
Every experience, good or bad, shapes our life in remarkable ways. And I think even the challenging moments that I've had in my life have probably shaped me in more significant ways than the years that were relatively uneventful. So even if you're maybe not necessarily grateful for those experiences, you can appreciate the benefits that it had in terms of your personal development.
But that is an attitude and a mindset, because you can very easily also say, I'm going to be a victim the rest of my life because I was dealt these cards. What advice can you give people to say, yeah, life sucks sometimes, but out of all of this, there is an opportunity to keep putting your feet forward and creating this sort of anti-fragility mindset?
I think it's easy to get pulled into that mindset of blame and kind of getting pulled into sort of a victim kind of mindset. And that's to say that people go through really challenging things in life, including a lot of people who go through much more challenging things than me. But ultimately, we don't choose the experiences that we go through in life in a lot of cases, but we can choose how we respond to those situations. And I think of the great book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, where he talks about like the one thing that he could control when he was in the concentration camps during the Holocaust was like, could he find meaning like in suffering? One of the things that is fundamental about us as a species is that we are in some ways a species that's constantly searching for meaning in our lives, in our purpose, our identity. And I think one of the things that it's most essential for us to find meaning in is to find meaning in pain and suffering. Because if you can't find meaning in it, that suffering can rot your soul. But if you can find meaning in it, you can move forward and become a better version of yourself. And the final thing I'll share is there's great research that was done kind of after the First World War along this idea of positive disintegration, which was that essentially some people who go through really challenging experiences, they can become like almost a different personality, but in like a good way. It's like the bad parts of them disintegrate, and then there's this sort of new positive kind of version of themselves. That's to say the challenging experience is still regrettable and difficult, but I think that from the ashes of a challenging experience, you can emerge to be a stronger, more resilient, kinder person.
Another area that I wanted to talk about, and I always call it the invisible bars of status quo. Even though life is really quite uncertain and I feel like I'm standing on shifting sand, at least I know where I am. And your whole mentality is about, no, you got to break those bars apart. You've got to swing for the fences. The golden handcuffs of perceived safety are, in fact, holding you back. Tell me a little bit more about this mentality that you encourage, even if I'm not wired as an entrepreneur, but just simply an individual navigating life.
Many people underestimate risk. they just think of the risk of making a decision, but they don't think of the risk in not taking a risk. And I see so many people afraid to launch an entrepreneurial venture or to put themselves like out there. And in a world that's moving really quickly and where potentially a lot of roles are going to become redundant or industries are going to get like disrupted, if you're not taking risks as a person, if you're not pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, you're at risk of really being left behind in a fast moving world.
When I listen to the experts in Canada, they're writing down entrepreneurship, 100,000 less entrepreneurs. The conditions and circumstances aren't set up for entrepreneurs in Canada. There's an exodus of intellectual and financial capital, but you're actually quite bullish on it. And you believe that the future of entrepreneurship in Canada is very alive and can in fact thrive if we focus on the right areas.
I am still very long on Canada. I think Canada has challenges, but Canada is also an amazing place to be an entrepreneur. We have an amazing people in our country, great human capital. We have a strong rule of law, which is something that is increasingly rare in the world and makes Canada a great place to invest in. We have great educational institutions. I think Canada, with some tweaks, can be an even better place to go launch a business. I think one of the main reasons that it's so challenging for young people to launch a business today is the cost of living crisis. And the more that we provide young Canadians the opportunity to live in a more affordable way, the more that people are going to be willing to take entrepreneurial risks. Because when you're afraid to meet your grocery or to be able to pay your grocery bill or pay your rent, it's really difficult to then also be thinking about taking a big risk in terms of launching a new business.
And so what's next for you, Scott? I mean, you're from what I understand, you fired yourself at the organization and made yourself chairman. So you must have ideas of where to go next.
Yeah, and I'm still actually CEO of Venture for Canada as of now. We're in the midst of doing the hiring. So I am CEO of Venture for Canada through approximately kind of the end of this year. But in terms of what's next is my book, The Uncertainty Advantage, doing work on promoting the book through the rest of this year in Canada, the US, and the UK. And then after, I'm going to go travel for 2 months in December, January to Australia and Japan and take a little break between doing Venture for Canada and my next thing. The problem at a very broad level I'm interested in tackling is how do you help people adjust in the context of all the changes with AI? And at this point, I am kind of testing a bunch of ideas, doing kind of interviews, but I'm eating my own dog food, Tony. And after 11 and a half years of leading Venture for Canada, I'm taking another big risk and going to go launch something new.
You know, Scott, I always end my show with my 3 takeaways, and I can't believe I'm talking to such a young individual and has come so far. Not a lot of people would have recovered from that early elementary years. You've gone from probably dreading walking out of the door to go to school to looking forward to networking and building people. And I got to come back to those 2 words, coming out. And I think the first thing was your parents and getting you to come out and realize that there was believe in yourself. Think about yourself as an entrepreneur. Just because you don't want to put on a pair of hockey skates, that doesn't define who you are, you do. And then I love this idea of your small wins. And at the same time, even the smallest of things you sometimes painted as potentially life-ending. When I come out with my sexuality or I take this risk. And nowadays you just embrace everything, that big or small, with this sense of opportunity. And then the last thing, I guess, about coming out is this sense of the only way out is through. And I've heard it before, but I really like the way you presented it. The concept of risk comes in 2 forms, taking a risk and not taking a risk. And I thought that was very profound for people to realize, because very often we do that mathematical equation, whether that's intellectual or emotional or how much work is involved, just on one side of that equation, which is if I take this risk. And I think we should spend more time really thinking through, but if I don't take the risk, what happens next? And status quo is never a guarantee. So for all of that and more, the book, I just can't wait to hear. I think you're going to be one of the most successful speakers, taking the debating champion and the lessons you've learned along the way. And I will be very surprised if you manage to carve out 2 months because I think this new opportunity is going to continue to be knocking hard at your door. And as much as you want to be snorkeling in the Great Barrier Reef, it'll be interesting to see if you're wired enough to take a little bit of time off before you dive into the next one.
Yeah, I feel I'd be tempted to do some work from Australia and Japan, but we will see. And I really appreciate the kind words, Tony. It's been a pleasure. You asked amazing questions and got me reflecting a lot on different experiences in my life. So thanks so much for having me on the show.
Joining me now is a friend of the show, a friend of mine, Alan DePontia. He's the Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for their small business portfolio. Alan, welcome back to Chatter That Matters.
Hey, Tony. Good to see you.
When we talk about people and all the things that you're investing in right now to move at the speed of life so that the small business owner can make these mission critical decisions, ultimately, though, it must come back to your advisor, building this relationship and this sense of trust.
I think they say people as that gateway into, like, what they're really seeking is information and guidance and support in terms of either getting things done or making decisions for their businesses. So I think people are a critical resource to that. They like the opportunity to pick up a phone and to chat with somebody, and that person can either put them with an expert. Like, the thing about RBC is because we have such a broad base of customers, that we have this deep industry expertise, whether you're a retailer, whether you're in the trades, whether you're in manufacturing. Like, we have specialists that work with all sizes of companies and really know that industry. And I think that's a big part of our value proposition as a bank, is really just having this deep industry expertise, not only for our larger clients, but trying to bring that downstream into small business as well.
You know, I've always used this mantra of head, heart, and hands. How people think, how people feel ultimately inspires what they do and how they act. And how important is the feeling, sharing stories about small business owners that dream and do?
Yeah, that's what I love about small business. There's so many wonderful stories. You know, every entrepreneur, even yourself, Tony, you have your own story, you know, and typically what I love when I talk to our clients and Canadian business owners is every story is different, but there's some common threads of that story. They're risk takers, but they're not like crazy risk takers. They think through the opportunity. They want to make sure that this is a good decision. But the thing that differentiates them versus others is they actually have the courage to take that step. And then the other thing you hear from entrepreneurs, it's never a straight line to success. You might see that company like, oh my God, that company is doing so well. But ultimately, when you talk to that entrepreneur, that might not even been their first venture. That might have been the third one that they actually really took off. And there was learnings in the first couple ventures. But more importantly, it's a little bit like a roller coaster ride. There's like wins and there's areas that, you know, you talk to, sometimes they're not sure how they're going to pay their payroll. The commonality of thread is the perseverance, the resourcefulness, the talking to others and learning from others. Those are some of those common traits that entrepreneurs have.
So, Alan, my final question really comes to the mosaic of Canada. Diverse population. We're inviting in many newcomers, and many of those newcomers have aspirations to control their own destiny, to be a small business owner. You know, do you shape and mold your offering based on who walks in the door? I'm a woman-led entrepreneur. I live within the Indigenous population. I'm new to Canada. Or is it sort of one size fits all?
The way I look at it is there's a lot of commonality across all those groups that we talked about, and then there's some uniqueness. And I think it's around balancing both the uniqueness as well as some of the commonality to really tailor it for the specific person that's sitting across the desk from you or on the phone as they look to start their business. So a couple of examples of how we've added that uniqueness to help. You know, there are a number of, areas of society that are underrepresented in terms of starting businesses, whether that's the Black community, the Indigenous community, or other. Each have their own unique challenges and opportunities. So we've done things, for example, in 2021, we introduced the Black Entrepreneur Program, which is part of our $100 million commitment to support the inclusion, growth, and prosperity of Black entrepreneurs in Canada. It really provides access to capital, but more importantly, mentorship and networking opportunities for Black entrepreneurs. Women are more than 50% of the population today. They're actually one of the fastest growing, and I think start more businesses than men today. And over the years, we've really tried to do things similar around networking opportunity, mentorship, access to capital. We support Women Entrepreneur Awards programs. really to just inspire and empower women and build that networking connection to be successful. And we're also partnering with some Indigenous organizations to provide lending and other support to those communities. And part of that is offering cultural language support and targeted resources to help them succeed. So don't be intimidated by banks. I know they're big organizations. They seem intimidating, but they really do want to help you. And what do you got to lose? Just ask.
Once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.